Saved my husband's number under a nickname, not his name, not my love or anything sweet like that. Just a two-word nickname that made me smile every time I saw it light up my screen. My mother found out about that nickname 8 months into our marriage, and she didn't speak to me for 11 days. That tells you everything you need to know about my family. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. Colonial style, white shutters, manicured lawn in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. My father was a cardiovascular surgeon. My mother had a graduate degree she never used because, as she put it, raising us was her full-time career. We had a cleaning lady named Mrs. Hendricks who came on Thursdays. We took a family vacation every summer, always somewhere that required a passport. My parents had friends who were judges and hospital administrators and city council members. At dinner parties, the conversation was always about property values, private school admissions, and who got promoted where. I was the oldest daughter. My sister was 4 years younger than me. We were not close growing up, though I wish we had been. My name is Audrey. I'm 31 now. And I need to tell you what happened because I still think about it almost every day. Not with anger anymore, but with something that feels like clarity. Like when the fog finally lifts and you can see the road again. My parents had a plan for me. It wasn't written anywhere. Nobody sat me down and handed me a document. But I knew it the same way you know when a room gets cold. Something in the air shifts and you just feel it. The plan was top university, a profession with a title, marriage to someone whose family name carried weight. A doctor, a lawyer, an investment banker. Someone my father could shake hands with and feel like he made a good trade. I did the first part right. University of Virginia, pre-law, graduated with honors. Came back to Charlotte and started working at a mid-sized firm downtown doing corporate contract work. My mother framed my bar passage certificate and hung it in the hallway. I met my husband on a Tuesday afternoon in October. My car had a flat tire in a parking lot off Independence Boulevard. I was wearing a blazer and pencil skirt and heels, standing there on the phone with AAA, being told the wait was 90 minutes. A truck pulled up 2 spaces down and a man got out. Both books, grey t-shirt, grease on his forearm, and he looked at my tire and said, "I can get that for you in 10 minutes if you want." I almost said no, not because I was scared, because I was raised to be suspicious of easy kindness from strangers. But it was hot, and I was going to be late to a meeting. And he looked at me like he was just offering, not expecting anything back. His name was Joel. He changed my tire in 8 minutes. He wouldn't take money. He said his mom had been in that same situation once and a stranger helped her and she always told him to pass it on. He smiled when he said it, this easy, unguarded smile, and I thought, when was the last time someone smiled at me like that? Without wanting something from it, we talked for 20 minutes in that parking lot. Then he put his number in my phone. 3 months later, we were seeing each other every weekend. 6 months later, I had met his family, his mom, his 2 younger brothers, his aunt who made sweet potato pie from scratch and gave me the recipe on a note card. 9 months later, he proposed in his mother's backyard with a ring he'd saved for over a year to buy. I hadn't introduced him to my parents yet. I kept telling myself I was waiting for the right moment. But the truth was simpler and uglier than that. I already knew how it would go. Joel was a master electrician. He ran his own small business with 2 employees. He'd done a couple years of community college before deciding school wasn't his path and getting his journeyman's certification instead. He owned a truck, a modest house in a good neighborhood in Concord, and a dog named Biscuit. He was 34 years old, and he had built something real with his hands and his own discipline. But he wasn't what my parents had planned. I told my mother about him on a Sunday call in February. I gave her the facts, his name, that he was kind, that I loved him, that he had his own business. I didn't lead with his profession. Instinct, I guess. A kind of self-preservation. She asked, what kind of business? I told her. She was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. Then she said, an electrician. Not a question. A verdict. I said yes. She said she needed to talk to my father. We ended the call shortly after. She did not say she was happy for me. The dinner happened 3 weeks later. My father booked a table at a restaurant in South Park, the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices on the guest copy. I wore a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, trying to split the difference between two worlds that were about to sit across from each other. Joel wore a blue button-down and his good slacks. He brought a bottle of wine he'd asked a friend to help him pick out. He held the door open for my mother. My father shook his hand and spent the next 90 minutes asking him questions in the tone of a job interview. Not a hostile one. Worse, a bored one. The kind of questions you ask when you've already decided the answer doesn't matter. And you see this as a long-term plan for yourself? The electrical work? Did you ever consider going back to finish a 4-year degree? How do you think that affects long-term what you can provide? Joel answered every one of them without flinching. He was calm in a way that I now recognize as the mark of someone who is genuinely secure in himself. Not defensive, not performing confidence, just settled. He talked about his business with quiet pride. He mentioned a commercial project he was bidding on. He talked about the house he'd renovated himself over 2 years. My father nodded in the way people do when they're not actually listening. My mother talked mostly about the restaurant. She complimented the duck. She asked me about a case I'd been working on. She directed almost nothing to Joel. On the drive home, I sat in Joel's truck in silence for a while. He didn't press me. He put his hand on mine at the first red light and kept it there. I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "You don't have anything to be sorry for." I didn't believe him then. I do now. Over the next several months, my parents were consistent. They never said outright that they disapproved. They said things like, "We just want to make sure you've thought this through." My mother once said, "Audrey, you've worked so hard to build a certain kind of life." My father said, "These differences become more significant over time, not less." They talked about it the way they talked about financial planning, in terms of risk and return, as if love were a portfolio and Joel was a volatile asset they wouldn't recommend. My sister was different. She'd met Joel twice and texted me after both times saying she liked him. She told me once, late at night when we were on the phone longer than usual, that she thought our parents were being unfair. That surprised me. We hadn't been confidants before. I think she surprised herself too. Joel and I got engaged in April and set a date for September. A Saturday. Simple ceremony at a venue outside the city, maybe 90 people, dinner and dancing afterward. Nothing elaborate. Neither of us wanted elaborate. We wanted real. I told my parents about the date in May. My father said, "We'll need to discuss some things before then." The discussion happened over brunch at their house. My mother had made a frittata. The coffee was good. And then my father set down his fork and said that he and my mother had concerns about whether this was the right decision, and that if I moved forward with it, they wanted me to understand that they would not be able to attend. I set down my own fork. I asked him to say that again. He repeated it. My mother looked at the frittata. I sat with that for a moment, the weight of it, the actual physical sensation of something shifting in your chest when a door closes. Not slams, just closes, quietly with a little click. I said, "Then I'll see you after." I drove home. I didn't call anyone. I sat with Biscuit on Joel's couch for about an hour while he finished a job. When he came home, I told him. He sat down next to me and listened to everything, and when I was done, he said, "What do you need from me right now?" I said, "I need to know you're not going to let this change anything." He said, "Nothing is going to change anything." We got married on a Saturday in September. 92 people came. Joel's mother cried during the vows, the good kind of crying, the kind that means something real is happening. My sister came. She sat in the front row on my side, and she held my hand before I walked out, and she whispered, "He's the one, Aud. You know that?" My parents did not come. My father sent a text at 11 a.m. that said, "We love you. We hope you'll understand our position in time." My mother called 2 days later. It was a short call. She asked how the weather had been. She said she hoped I was well. She said they'd like to see me for the holidays if I was available. She asked this in the same voice she used to ask if I'd remember to schedule my dental cleaning. I said I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. What I did instead was live my life. And it turned out that life was very good. Joe's business grew. Within 18 months, he had 6 employees and had landed 2 major commercial contracts, one with a property developer building a new mixed-use complex in Concord, one with a school district doing safety upgrades across 4 buildings. He wasn't just good at the work. He was good at running a business. He was organized, reliable, and he treated his guys with real respect. I watched him manage a difficult situation with a client one afternoon, patient, firm, professional. And I thought, my father has no idea who he dismissed at that dinner table. I made partner at my firm earlier than expected. We refinanced the house and renovated the kitchen ourselves. Well, Joel and his brother did most of the physical work while I made a lot of decisions about cabinet hardware. We got a second dog. We started hosting Sunday dinners that filled up every chair we owned. My sister came to those dinners. She and I grew closer in a way I hadn't expected. She'd gone through her own difficult stretch, a relationship that hadn't worked, some tension with my parents about her own choices, and we started talking more honestly than we ever had as kids. She told me once that watching me leave the dinner table that day, the day our parents said they wouldn't come to the wedding, had changed something in her. That it gave her a reference point. "I saw you just put down your fork and go," she said. And I thought, oh, you can just do that. I think about that a lot. About 14 months after our wedding, I got a call from my mother. Not the careful, social obligation kind of call. A different one. She was at the hospital. Not her, my father. He'd had a cardiac event. A mild one, they thought, but they were running tests. I drove to the hospital. Joel came with me without me having to ask. My father was okay. He spent 2 nights in the hospital and went home with some medication adjustments and instructions to reduce stress. I sat with him the first afternoon. We talked for a while, carefully at first, then less carefully. He asked about my work. I told him. He asked about the house. I described the kitchen renovation. He was quiet for a bit and then he said, "Joel did that?" I said yes. He said he's good with his hands. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to one. But I recognized it for what it was, a small door cracked open. I nodded and said, "He's good at a lot of things, Dad." He looked out the window. He said, "I know I haven't been easy." I said, "No, you haven't." He didn't say anything else on the subject. But when Joel came in an hour later with 2 coffees and a sandwich from the deli down the street, my father accepted the coffee and said thank you, and they talked for 20 minutes about the hospital's electrical system, what was outdated, what Joel would do differently. My father asked questions the whole time, different questions than the restaurant, real ones. My mother called me the following week. She said she'd been doing some thinking. She said a lot of things, some of which landed and some of which didn't quite. She used the phrase, "we had concerns," several times. But she also said, "I can see that you're happy. I can see that clearly now." And then she said, "I don't want to lose more time." I let her talk. I didn't rush to forgive and I didn't rush to stay cold. I just listened, which felt like the right thing to do. Joel and I talked about it that night on the back porch. It was late fall, cool enough for a jacket. He asked what I wanted to do. I said I didn't know yet. He said that whatever I decided, he'd back me up, that he had nothing against them. He never had anything against them really, just their behavior, and that if I wanted to rebuild something, he was in. That's who he is. We had Thanksgiving at our house that year. My parents came, my sister came, Joe's mother and one of his brothers came. We used every folding chair we owned and ate in shifts at 2 different tables, and it was chaotic and a little awkward at first. And then, somewhere around the second round of pie, it wasn't. I watched my father help my mother-in-law with her coat when she got up to leave. I watched my mother ask my sister for her cornbread dressing recipe and actually write it down. I stood in the kitchen doorway holding my wine and I thought, this is what it looks like when you make the right call. Not a perfect ending, not a movie, just people sitting down together, choosing to try. It's been almost 3 years since the wedding now. My father has met Joel for breakfast twice on his own, something he initiated. My mother calls more than she used to, and the calls are longer and less like status reports. It's not what I would have designed if I'd been given a choice, but it's real. And it's ours. Joel is in the kitchen right now. He's making eggs because it's Sunday morning and that's our thing. The dogs are underfoot. My sister is coming over later. The sun is coming through the window above the sink at that specific angle it gets in the fall, and it lights up the whole kitchen, the one we built together, in a way that makes the whole room look like something worth keeping. I didn't marry a title or a tax bracket. I married a man who changed my tire and didn't want anything back, who held my hand at a red light when I had nothing to give, who showed up to a hospital with coffee for a man who had dismissed him without a second thought. There is no hierarchy of worth that accounts for that. There is no prestige that weighs more. I know that now in a way I couldn't have explained at 25 or even at 28. You don't learn it by being told. You learn it by making the call, the real one, the one that costs something, and then living inside the choice long enough to see what it becomes. What it became, for me, is this Sunday morning, and I wouldn't trade it for anything they had in mind. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what actually happened in my family, not the surface version, the one where two people disapproved of a choice and eventually came around, but the deeper version, the one about cause and effect, about what we put out and what we get back. Not in some mystical sense, but in the plain, everyday way that life tends to mirror who we actually are. My parents spent 20 years building a version of me they could present to the world. They did it out of love. I believe that. But love that comes with conditions is a different kind of thing than love that doesn't. What they got back from me? Distance? Silence. A wedding they weren't at? Wasn't cruelty. It was the natural result of treating a daughter like a portfolio. You invest in control long enough. You don't get loyalty. You get someone who learns to protect herself. Joel was the opposite of everything they built. And that's exactly why he was right. He didn't want to shape me. He just wanted to be next to me. There's a difference, and I didn't fully understand it until I was standing in a parking lot in October, watching a man change my tire and expect nothing back. That kind of person is rarer than anything my parents ever put on a list. What I learned, the hard way, the only real way, is that intelligence isn't the same as wisdom. My father was brilliant. My mother was sharp and capable and had built a beautiful life by almost every external measure. But they couldn't see Joe because they were looking at a category instead of a person. That's not a failure of intelligence, it's a failure of attention, of the willingness to look past what something costs and ask what it's actually worth. The moral piece is harder to talk about because it requires admitting something uncomfortable. I almost let them win. Not because they were right, but because the pull of their approval was so old and so deep that walking away from it felt like losing something essential. Standing up for Joel, for myself, really took more out of me than I expected. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was just putting down a fork and saying, "Then I'll see you after." Quiet, final, mine. And the grit part. That's the part nobody sees. It's not the wedding or the promotion or the Sunday dinners that fill every chair. It's the months in between when you wonder if you made a mistake and you have to decide again to trust the choice you made. Joel did that too. He walked into a dinner where he wasn't wanted and answered every condescending question without once losing his dignity. That's not luck. That's character built over years of doing the right thing when no one was watching. What my parents saw in that one photo I could have sent, I didn't send a photo, but if I had, is that life kept going without their approval. And it went well. That tends to land harder than anything you could say out loud. My father came to understand this slowly in a hospital room. My mother came to it on a phone call she initiated. It took longer than it should have. But it happened. Because that's what tends to happen when you stop trying to control the outcome and start being honest about the person in front of you. I don't carry any bitterness about how long it took. I'm 31 years old and I have a husband who still makes me eggs on Sunday morning and dogs underfoot and a sister who drives over just to sit on the porch. You can't hold on to what almost was when what actually is looks like this.